Tunde Adebayo was the golden son of Lagos. At 32 he had conquered the tech world in Silicon Valley, selling his first major startup for a valuation that made him an instant billionaire in Naira and a verifiable success story across the continent. When he announced his return to Nigeria not just for a visit, but to marry Bisola Lawal, a socialite whose glamour matched his newly acquired status, all of Lagos held its breath. Their engagement was the subject of every society page, every major blog, and every breathless conversation from Ikoyi to Lekki. The wedding, planned for the lavish ballroom of the Eco Hotel, promised to be the event of the decade. Bisola, or Bizi as she preferred, was electric. She was the quintessential modern Nigerian woman, sharp, impeccably dressed and flawlessly articulate. She managed Tunde's calendar, charmed his business associates, and played the role of the devoted fiancée to perfection. Tunde saw her as his equal, a dazzling partner who could handle the complexity of his new life. Yet Tunde's wealth meant nothing without the blessing of his family, especially his father, Pa Adebayo. Pa Adebayo was a man who embodied the dignity of the old guard. A retired educator, his life was marked by service and wisdom. But 2 years prior, a severe stroke had left him paralyzed on his left side, robbing him of his mobility and much of his speech. He remained at the family home in Surulere, a respectable, well-loved house that stood in stark contrast to the sleek penthouse Bizi insisted Tunde buy. Bizi often referred to the Surulere house as quaint, and Pa Adebayo's care as a necessary inconvenience. Though Tunde employed 2 full-time caregivers, Mama Fola and her assistant, Bizi was expected to visit, to show deference, and to embody the respect Tunde held for his heritage. And Bizi, the actress, played the part beautifully. When Tunde was present, Bizi was angelic, feeding Pa Adebayo spoon by spoon, wiping his chin and speaking to him in soft, comforting tones. "I cherish your father, Tunde," she'd murmur, her hand resting delicately on his arm. "He is a wise, strong man. Taking care of him is an honor." Tunde, whose heart still ached over his father's reduced state, would watch these scenes with profound gratitude. He felt he had found not just a wife but a daughter for his father. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Tunde was supposed to be in Abuja for a final round of business meetings before the festivities began, but an early conclusion to the talks allowed him to catch a late-night flight back to Lagos. He decided to surprise Bizi and his father. He landed before dawn and drove straight to the Surulere family home, instructing his driver Emeka to wait around the corner. He wanted a quiet, unannounced visit. The compound was still and peaceful. Tunde let himself in with his old key. The main house was dark, but a low light glowed in the small annex where his father was most comfortable. He knew Mama Fola would be asleep in the adjoining room. He smiled, imagining his father's joy at his unexpected return. He moved silently through the corridor toward the annex. As he neared the door, he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Not Mama Fola's gentle humming but a sharp, frustrated hiss. Tunde froze. The voice was Bizi's, stripped of its social polish, harsh and unfamiliar. "Are you satisfied now, old man?" Bizi's voice cut through the stillness. "Look at me on my knees days before my wedding, dealing with your mess. Do you know the designer of the dress I am wearing? Do you know how much a wedding planner costs in this city? And yet here I am wiping your drool." Tunde moved closer, his heart pounding in unnatural rhythm against his ribs. He pressed himself against the doorframe, looking into the room. His father, Pa Adebayo, was seated in his motorized wheelchair, his head tilted slightly in resignation. He had obviously suffered some minor mishap. A small stain was visible on his clean kaftan. Bizi stood over him, holding a small plastic basin. She was still dressed in a shimmering evening gown from a party the night before, a vision of high fashion clashing violently with the humble setting. The glamour was still there, but her face was a mask of cold, unadulterated contempt. "And you think I don't know that you're looking forward to ruining my dress with your condition?" she spat, her voice laced with venom. "You've already ruined Tunde's life by keeping him chained to this ridiculous compound." She raised the basin, filled with murky brown water Tunde realized must have been used to rinse a mop or clean the kitchen floor. Pa Adebayo's eyes, usually dull with the effects of the stroke, widened in terror. He couldn't speak, but his good hand instinctively raised, a weak, trembling gesture of defense. Tunde watched, immobilized by a shock that felt like a physical assault. The silence of the morning amplified the sickening reality of the scene. Bizi leaned down, her face inches from the old man's. "You want to be difficult? Let's be difficult." With a vicious snap of her wrist, she poured the entire contents of the basin not on the floor, but directly over Pa Adebayo's head. The water, filthy, cold, and smelling faintly of disinfectant, soaked the elder man. It ran down his face, dripping from his beard and soaking into his caftan. It was a deliberate, dehumanizing act, a baptism in filth meant to destroy his dignity. Pa Adebayo made a low, choking sound, a silent sob of humiliation and defeat. His head dropped forward. Beezy stepped back, flicking the dirty water from her fingers as if they were contaminated. There. Maybe that will wash some sense into you. Now, let's see if Tunde will still worship you when you stink like the gutter. A profound, terrifying stillness descended upon the room. Beezy turned, finally, her expression of disgust slowly transforming into one of self-satisfaction. It was then, standing in the doorway, that she saw Tunde. He hadn't moved. He was a statue carved from pure ice, his face devoid of color, his eyes wide and vacant. He was still wearing the bespoke, European-cut suit he'd worn to the Abuja meeting, but it felt suddenly cheap, a clown costume in this scene of tragedy. Beezy's jaw dropped. The blood drained from her face, leaving her features sharp and monstrous. Tunde? It's not, I can explain. He had an accident and I... Stop. Tunde's voice was barely a whisper, a hollow dead sound that held more power than any shout. He stepped into the room, his gaze fixed on his father. Pa Adebayo lifted his head, the dirty water dripping from his face, his eyes meeting Tunde's. In that moment, Tunde saw not just his father, but the gentle, quiet teen he had become, humiliated, defenseless, pleading not for help but for dignity. Tunde walked past Beezy as if she were thin air. He knelt beside his father's wheelchair, his own expensive suit soaking in the puddle that had formed on the floor. He gently wiped the dirty water from his father's eyes with his own handkerchief, his hands trembling. "Baba," Tunde whispered, his voice cracking, "my father. Forgive me." He hadn't apologized for his own mistakes, but for bringing this malice into his father's sanctuary. Beezy, now hysterical, launched into a torrent of lies, tears of panic streaming down her face. "It was an accident, Tunde. He was trying to grab my dress. He's unmanageable. I was only trying to help, to clean him up." Tunde finally turned to her. He didn't raise his voice. That cold, hollow sound was far more frightening than rage. "You called him difficult," Tunde said, his eyes scanning her expensive dress, the panic terror in her face. "You called him unmanageable. You poured dirty water on the man who gave me life. You did this because you thought no one would ever see the real you." He pointed at the soaked caftan, the pooling water, and the broken spirit in his father's eyes. "That," Tunde said, his voice ringing with finality, "is not an accident. That is who you are. The most beautiful, glamorous cage of a woman in Lagos. You are filth, Beezy. And I won't let you poison my family." He reached for her hand and, with a swift, decisive motion, pulled the massive engagement ring, a custom-cut diamond that had cost him the equivalent of a small clinic, from her finger. "The engagement is over," he declared. "Get out of my house. Do not ever contact me or my family again." Beezy screamed, a raw, theatrical sound of shock and utter defeat. She stumbled back, the realization of her spectacular ruin hitting her like a wave. She had lost the golden sun of Lagos, the easy path to wealth and status, all for a fleeting moment of cruelty. She was exposed. The story, whispered at first, exploded across Lagos within hours. The wedding was cancelled. Tunde Adebayo, the billionaire, didn't issue a cold press release. He issued a clear, moral declaration. He stated simply that he could not marry a woman who lacked basic humanity and respect for his family. He did not initially mention the dirty water, allowing society's own imagination to fill the gap. But Beezy, desperate for revenge, started her own counter-narrative, claiming Tunde was unstable, that his father was violent, and that the family was too local for her. The climax arrived 3 days later at the venue Beezy had planned for their bridal shower, a high-society event she refused to cancel, hoping to save face. Tunde arrived uninvited but not alone. He walked in not in a suit but in a simple, immaculate white buba and sokoto, with his father, Pa Adebayo, beside him in his wheelchair. The room, filled with Lagos's elite, fell silent. Beezy, surrounded by her friends, looked like a hunted animal. Tunde took the microphone. He didn't talk about Beezy. He spoke about his father. 2 years ago, a stroke stole my father's ability to move and speak. But it did not steal his dignity. It did not steal his kindness. And it certainly did not steal his authority as the patriarch of the Adebayo family. He paused, looking directly at the sea of shocked faces. "I have heard the stories that have been spread. I want to tell you the truth. I ended my engagement not because of a lie, but because of a cup of dirty water. A cup of cold, filthy water, poured over my father's head as he sat helpless. This was the kindness my future wife showed him when she thought no one was watching. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. He looked at his father, whose chin was slightly trembling. Tunde knelt beside his father's wheelchair, just as he had done in the annex. I came back to Lagos thinking I needed to build a gilded empire, but I forgot the foundations of my own home. Tunde's voice broke, tears finally welling in his eyes. The truth is, my father has needed me and I left him in the care of a snake. I have failed him. I have let him down. Today I do not ask for your pity but for your understanding. Respect is not for sale and kindness is the only true wealth. He embraced his father, burying his face in his shoulder. Pa Adebayo, unable to speak, reached up with his good hand and patted Tunde's head, a simple gesture of forgiveness and unconditional love. The sight of the powerful billionaire, weeping not for his lost love but for his father's broken dignity, broke the room. Guests, seeing the raw, authentic grief and the quiet, enduring love between father and son, began to cry. The sound of choked sobs spread through the elegant ballroom, shaking the foundations of their superficial world. Bisola fled, her reputation and her future shattered instantly by the truth. Tunde never rebuilt his life with the glamour of his past. He sold the penthouse and returned fully to the Surulere family home. He devoted himself to his father's care and rehabilitation. He used his wealth to establish the Pa Adebayo Foundation for Stroke Recovery, providing free therapy and care for elders across Lagos. The money that would have been spent on a lavish wedding was now funding dignity for dozens of families. His life was no longer about magazine covers or extravagant parties, but about the quiet, daily moments of care, feeding his father, reading to him and helping him with his physical therapy. In those moments, Tunde found a richness and peace that all his billions abroad could never buy. He learned the truth that his quiet father, sitting paralyzed, had known all along. Wealth is merely a tool, but true honor is the way you treat those who can give you nothing in return. His redemption was complete, and the family home, once again, was a sanctuary of love.